Human rights are designed to stop the abuse of power. We expect dictators to abuse their power, and their abuse is often very visible. Demonstrators are beaten up, newspapers are closed, trade unionists are imprisoned. History tells us, however, that sometimes democracies are also guilty of misconduct. As some of you may recall, a famous commentator once warned us against the tyranny of the majority. Curiously, when a democracy is guilty of misconduct, the abuse is sometimes more difficult to see than when a dictatorship abuses power. The real impact of the tyranny of the majority is often disguised. There may be no summary executions, no torture victims, no imprisoned journalists. The misconduct, the abuse of power, is often elusive. Sometimes it's hidden. I don't mean that there's a cover-up, but in a democracy, misconduct is often obscured by subtle legal arguments, by compelling political justifications. Often there's a hint of populism. And in a democracy, those most affected by misconduct are not usually articulate journalists or well-organized trade unionists or large numbers of noisy, vocal demonstrators. In a democracy, those most affected are usually the most disadvantaged members of society. Indeed, they're often invisible. Sometimes they're unpopular. And here, it seems to me, is the historic role for human rights: to expose, to challenge the abuse of power wherever it occurs and whatever form it takes. Whether the abuse is at the hands of a dictator or a democracy, whether it is deliberate or accidental, whether those affected are popular or unpopular, whether they are visible or hidden. I am an independent human rights expert accountable to the United Nations General Assembly and the United Nations Human Rights Council. And my responsibility is to advise states and others on how to realize the right to the highest attainable standard of health. This right is very wide-ranging, and it includes, crucially, access to medical care without discrimination. For more information about the right to health, and also for more information about my United Nations mandate, you will find some documents at the back of the room. In January 2006, I visited Sweden at the invitation of the government. As my report to the United Nations records, I found a health status, life expectancy, a standard of living that are amongst the best in the world. The Swedish health system is recognized as one of the nation's vital social institutions, and it attracts very considerable resources. On the whole, Sweden has a proud record, a fine record of respect for human rights and democratic principles. However, my UN report also draws attention to some right to health problems. In Sweden, mental health is deteriorating. In Sweden, comprehensive harm reduction programs for intravenous drug users are not available throughout the country. The Samis' special status as the indigenous people of Sweden has not yet translated into specific health initiatives. And my report also draws attention to the alarming health situation of undocumented people in Sweden. Sweden has ratified numerous international human rights treaties that recognize the right to the highest attainable standard of health. In other words, Sweden is legally bound to do all it reasonably can to deliver the right to health. Crucially, this fundamental human right is to be enjoyed by all, without discrimination, and including to be enjoyed by undocumented people. We all know that undocumented people are among the most vulnerable and most marginal in Sweden. They are precisely the sort of disadvantaged group that international human rights law is designed to protect. Nobody would suggest that an undocumented person who is charged with a criminal offense should be denied their human right to a fair trial. Equally, a sick, undocumented person should not be denied their fundamental human right to medical care without discrimination. When undocumented people are asked to pay medical fees that are not required of others who are living in Sweden, this is a discriminatory obstacle to their enjoyment of the right to the highest attainable standard of health. Invariably, they cannot afford the fees, and so they do not have the medical care they need. The tuberculosis is untreated. The chemotherapy is missed. The antenatal care is neglected, endangering mother and baby. There are many reasons for not discriminating against undocumented people: ethical reasons, humanitarian reasons, public health reasons, economic reasons. And this morning, we will be hearing a number of these arguments. There is also a human rights argument for non-discrimination, an argument that in my report I endorse, and I share it with 2 UN committees of independent human rights experts. In conclusion, human rights are a check against the abuse of power, whether by dictators or by democracies. And in democracies, human rights are especially important as a way of protecting the most marginal, the most disadvantaged. And in Sweden, respect for the right to health of undocumented people will help to stop a silent, hidden, grave injustice. An injustice that causes pain and threatens lives. Can I close by very warmly thanking the organizers for inviting me to this important meeting. I think a special thanks are due to the Swedish Red Cross. If I can mention in particular, if I may, Charlotta and Matthias, but I know there are many, many others, too numerous to mention, who are responsible for this meeting. Personally, I'm grateful to you all. I'd really also like to very briefly congratulate the organizers for taking this initiative and thank all of you for attending. But perhaps in particular, can I really very warmly congratulate all those who are working so hard in Sweden with undocumented people, with a view to protecting their fundamental human rights, including the international right to the highest attainable standard of health. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Paul, for these very clear opinions that you've given us.